Coming up on Chasing the Natty, we're going to kick it back a little this week and just take some time to answer some of y'all's most burning questions surrounding CFF this time of year. We'll be touching on draft strategy, post-hype sleepers, freshmen, changes in offensive systems, team defenses, and even so much more than that. Honestly, I'm kind of hard-pressed to think of a topic we won't be touching on today. All this and more coming right after this.
Cutting, mesmerizing run by the quarterback.
Marvin Harrison Jr. touchdown. Marvelous Marv.
Ball next to the end zone, dropped it in for Franklin. Oh, majestic touchdown.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast.
All right, welcome in everybody. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing Natty podcast. I hope you guys have a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. Well, it is June, Dynasty month has passed, and now we're kind of in that part of the season where, not a lot of news coming out and everything, so it's really just all of us sitting back and just kind of coming up with different things to discuss. And I figured no better way to start off that time of year than to reach out to all of you guys listening out there and to just ask you guys what kind of questions do you want us to answer on the pod. So we got about 15 questions here today that we will be discussing. But to help us with that, I have our wonderful resident IDP and CFF expert here at Campus to Canton, Mr. Justice. Justice, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing good, man. Enjoying a nice, peaceful, quiet Sunday afternoon.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I got again my new place. If y'all can't tell, if you're watching on YouTube, you can probably tell my background is very different than what I have used in the past. We got a new place, so we're all moved in and everything. Still got to hang some stuff up and everything, but we got like a porch now, and it's got a forest view. Oh my god, dude! I cannot tell you. Once we get some patio furniture and everything like that, it's gonna be hard to get me off of that. Whenever I just need to sit down and write something for the CFF guide, pull out my laptop, just go out back there and just sit back there for hours. Oh, can't wait for that. But first, I need money, so we'll figure that part out later. But yeah, like I mentioned at the top of the show, we got a lot of great questions from y'all today. Some of y'all asked multiple questions. We went through and we picked one question from each of you. So if I don't get to some of your questions, I might go back on Twitter and answer them on Twitter. But really appreciate you guys coming in and giving us some really awesome questions. Like I said, pretty much touching on almost any type of CFF topic here today. We got some kind of big names we'll touch on, but we also got some you guys asking for some sleepers, so we'll provide that for you guys here today. But first, let's just go ahead and get this out of the way, and let's go ahead and do my spiel, guys. If you want to support what we're doing here for college fantasy football, make sure you go over and subscribe to campustocanton.com, where we have all of our written content, tools, and everything you need for your CFF, C2C, and Devy needs, and even some college IDP fantasy tools over there. Justice, you've been doing an incredible job with that kind of stuff over there. And we got even more stuff coming your way. Constantly, we have ideas flowing behind the scenes in our Slack channel. Tons of great stuff coming y'all's way. And if you really want to support the show as well, make sure you're following myself and the show on Twitter at CFF_Jared, and the show's Twitter as well at Chasing the Natty. You can also follow Justice at Justice_2318. Again, that's Justice at _2318. And then if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. We do have that goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers by the start of the season, and with our live mock drafts coming up, all those live streams that you guys loved last year, definitely tell all your friends about that. Can't wait to get those started up. The first one of those we have is coming up on June 11th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Got a great guest lined up for you guys. Got to confirm some things. I haven't announced it yet who's going to be, but it's going to be a pretty fun guest for you guys. It's been somebody I've been trying to get on the show for pretty much 2 years now. So hopefully we can get that going. And then if you're listening to this on podcast, make sure you just follow there. Leave those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. Love to read those from you guys. And last but not least, just want to shout out my awesome CFF team over here at Campus to Canton. I really couldn't do it without them. Nate Marquise, Chris K, Justice, obviously, Brandon Sanders, Chris Moxley, Ethan Sowers, Justin Leo, aka Volume Pigs, has been doing some awesome work on the website with some of the articles he's written. I really couldn't do half of what I do without these guys, so make sure you're following each and every one of those guys on Twitter. Justice, shall we just go ahead and get into this, man?
Yeah.
Or
yeah,
do you want?
I'm
Or do you,
excited.
actually, I just thought about this. Do we want to talk about our supplemental draft we've been doing through last couple days?
I mean, we can. It's yeah. I mean, I know I've said in the group chat numerous times, like I was asked to join the league, I guess in the second round last year. I think
It was
the
in the first
previous
round.
owner.
Yeah.
Well, I was up in the second round, I
Okay.
guess.
Yes.
Because he had timed out in the first round and he was getting ready to time out in the second round.
Yes, I remember now.
And so, um, you know, I didn't really have a lot of preparation time, but what I've seen like since then and prepping for this year's draft is like it astounds me like how insanely high that league values quarterbacks given the size of the league.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like this league values quarterbacks higher than a 24 team start 3 quarterback league.
It is
just
pretty
like
insane.
I've never seen that. Like for given the was it 12 teams, 14 teams maybe?
14 teams.
And so yeah, like that continues to fascinate me, I guess you could say.
Dude,
But I mean, other than that, like, I'm happy with my draft so far.
well, you only had like 50 billion picks, I feel like you traded last year, dude. Like Justice,
My team was not good.
Yeah, I think Justice traded back like 17 times last year and like asked for 2023 picks. And so like I'm literally looking at Justice every time it leaves my pick, and I'm like, holy crap, Justice has got like 2 to 3 picks between between here and my next pick, like, and it's every single time. It's not just one side of the draft. This draft is, I consider, the hardest that I do every single year because these are really, really smart guys that do this draft, and they're all very, very good at what they do. And my big thing this year was like I traded for Joe Milton, and I'm like, okay, I'm at the 106. I might be able to get Nico Iamaleava there. And as it got closer and closer, I kind of realized what Justice realized. I'm like, man, this league really values QBs, and there's no way Nico's still going to be there at the 106. But I'm like, okay, so it's probably Dante, Arch, or Malachi Nelson that go off at the 101, and then some other good options there. I might be, if I trade up to like the 102 through 104, I will increase my chance of getting Nico there. I think I talked to you, Justice. I talked to Brandon, and I talked to Whedon, who is at 102. I talked to all 3 of you guys. None of you were gonna budge. And I'm like, well, crap. I'm just gonna have to press my luck, or I'm just gonna have to cross my fingers here. Draft starts, immediately somebody trades up from the back end of the round and takes Nico 101, and I'm just like, well, shoot. I'm really glad that I did not, because I never expect him to go off 101.
I certainly did not either. I mean, I think we were talking like before the pick was traded, we all thought Arch Manning might be the 1.1. And so I was thinking, okay, well, I'll get my pick of Malachi Nelson or Nico, right? Well, yeah, that plan kind of went out the window really quick.
That's an entire draft.
And I didn't even think about another plan, right? So
no, that's an entire draft. Is like every time we think that we kind of know what's going to happen in a supplemental draft, it's like, no, absolutely not. It's definitely the most frustrating. Like I said, it's the hardest draft I do every year because I plan and plan and plan for it, and then immediately, like you got to change your entire plan almost immediately. It's absolutely nuts.
Like it definitely threw me for a loop. So I ended up taking Cedric Baxter, and then because my first round pick got skipped last year because the previous owner wasn't around, I was awarded like a compensatory pick, if you will, at the end of the second round.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, end of the first round, and I ended up getting Arch Manning there. So I was really shocked that like Arch was still there, but
I mean, yeah,
happy to take him.
I'm not super high on Arch because I think he still has to follow that same path that like Quinn Ewers does, where like he just has to throw a crap ton of touchdowns. I don't really think they're gonna have him run a ton in Sarkisian's offense. So
Yeah, I'm not high on him either, but I just felt like I couldn't,
you had the free pick.
given the fact of how this league values quarterbacks, and I just figured I didn't feel like I could pass up on that opportunity.
I will say it sucked not having a second round pick this year because like there were so many people left on the board, and I was just watching all the guys that I wanted just go off one after another, and I'm like, I got nothing to trade with here. So, all right, that's enough. People don't want to hear us talk about this for hours on end. Let's go ahead and get to the first question here, and this will kind of double as our transfer portal news segment of the week because, quite frankly, Zachary Franklin is now at Ole Miss, and Ben Wagner here basically took the opportunity to say, like, hey, he is now officially committed to Ole Miss. Where do you put him in your wide receiver rankings with this landing spot? For those of you who don't know, I took Zachary Franklin completely out of my wide receiver rankings until he found a home because I had really no clue where he was going to land. Because if he went back to UTSA, boom, he goes right back to the top. If he went to Ole Miss, which I'll get to in a second here, he's probably going to be all right with his lane spot. And then if he went somewhere like LSU or anywhere like that, I would not have known really where to put him. So I'll start off with this question here. So obviously, Ole Miss not nearly as good as him going back to UTSA, so he's taking a tumble for me. I'm currently having him hover around the wide receiver 45 to 50 range. And some people might be saying like, oh, that seems really, really kind of harsh here, Jared. Like, again, if he's the number one wide receiver at Ole Miss, which I don't think that's a foregone conclusion, but regardless, let's pretend that he is. I don't think that position's as great as we have been kind of building it up, at least for last year. Last year, Malik Heath, 60 catches, 971 yards, 5 touchdowns. That's the full year. In the regular season, he went 52, 834, and 4 touchdowns. And he finished as a wide receiver 85 last year. So he had some good games. But for the most part, like there were a lot of games where you're kind of mostly disappointed with him. He didn't really catch on till close to the end of the year. So if we pretend that that is what Zachary Franklin's going to see this year, he's not somebody that you really want to be drafting right now. Again, that ceiling's capped right there. In addition, he's going to be battling Zachary Franklin's going to be battling guys like Trey Harris, who just came over from Louisiana Tech. I do think Franklin's a better receiver than Trey Harris, but even still, they're going to be battling each other. You got Jordan Watkins from Louisville finally kind of stepping up in the slot there, definitely going to be fighting him for targets. And then you got their 2 tight ends, Prescorn and Trigg. And even so, let's say last year, again, you had Heath. He only had 5 touchdowns on the year. Let's bump that up to like 8. Because again, maybe that's just bad touchdown luck right there. That still would only put Franklin in the wide receiver 53 last year. So I really think the ceiling's mostly capped here. And if you don't believe me, we can go even back even further with Charlie Weiss as the offensive coordinator last year, as well as his time at USF. 2018, 65, 873, and 5 touchdowns. 2019, 61 catches, 771 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Those were his top receiver numbers. Yeah, that's decent. That'll get you some good weeks. So I would take him in a best ball draft. But if you're looking at him in a redraft, I would not be drafting him really that highly. Justice, your thoughts here, man?
So I think I agree with you. I just redid all my rankings on our site over last weekend. And so I was trying to refresh my memory here before the show, but I ranked Franklin assuming he was going to Ole Miss because that was kind of the rumor that was pretty prevalent at that time. And I ranked him 41.
Mm-hmm.
And that's assuming he is the wide receiver 1, right?
That is assuming.
And, and the more I think about it, I'm not so I don't feel that's as certain about that, right? So I can certainly see it being lower, right? With the fact that he's moving up, quite a bit in terms of level of competition. That's a strike against him. Number 2, yep. He's coming in like super late. That feels like a strike against him. So it's not. If I was going to bet money, is he going to be the wide receiver 1 for Ole Miss? Yes or no? I'm going to put money on no.
Oh, really? Well, so again, that begs the question then: who becomes the wide receiver 1 for Ole Miss?
I don't know who I think would be the wide receiver 1. I just feel like it's gonna be. We talk about running back by committee, but I feel
Receiver
like
by
it's
committee.
receiver by committee. Like I just feel like there's so many bodies that I feel are at least somewhat similarly talented that
Hmm.
it's gonna be spread around a lot.
Yeah, so I'm looking at his May ADP right here, and it's actually really good ADP because he entered the portal right there at the end of April and everything. So last month he was being taken as the wide receiver 16 in the transfer portal. That puts him at an ADP of looks like in the mid to late third round. So he dropped for sure, but
Oh
like
yeah,
if you assumed it, like again, let's say that's people kind of shooting the gap of like, all right, if he goes back to Ole Miss or if he goes back to UTSA,
yeah,
I got a steal in the third round. So maybe now that he's at Ole Miss, he drops down to like the fifth round. That's still way too high for me. Like like, if I
yeah,
have him at wide receiver 46 right now, which is where I currently have him in my rankings, that makes him like a 10th, 11th round value for me right now. I'll take the shot there, especially in best ball, like I said. But for
yep,
now, I think this is quickly going to be a guy that is way overvalued in drafts.
yeah. I agree. I think he's someone that's going to go higher than I would ever take him, most likely. So,
All right. Justice, we'll have you answer this next question here. This is kind of a fun one, very big overarching one. Where are you most comfortable with taking each position in a draft? So, like early, middle, late. Are you somebody, Justice, who is okay with like punting on a position to get them late? Is there a position that you feel like you need to hit on early because you don't like what you can grab later? What is kind of your overall draft strategy with that?
so I think the number one. I mean, I hate to answer a question with a question, but before you can really answer this question, you need to understand the league settings, right?
Of course.
Um, and how big is the league? How's the scoring? All of those things. Because like we just talked about earlier, that league we're drafting in now, like they value QBs like no one's business. And so in that league, you have to be. The point is you have to be able to adjust, right?
Hmm.
You can have a strategy, but you got to be able to adjust depending on the league.
Let's
I would
say,
say
I was,
generally speaking, like a 12 team, two quarterback league.
yeah, like my best balls.
Um, I'm probably waiting on quarterback. Like, the two positions I'm probably waiting. I'm waiting longest probably on tight end, right? Unless I'm gonna spend up and get like Gadsden or Bowers.
Hmm.
I'm probably waiting on tight end. The the longest of the positions. But the QB would probably be next. I
No,
just feel like there are QBs I like, more so in the that I can get later.
hmm.
Whereas running back and wide receiver, I'm not necessarily don't have that same feeling, right? I feel like especially with wide receivers this year, I feel um, like I want to grab them early.
So I kind of have an interesting way to think about this and everything because my default strategy, and I've done a lot of best ball leagues this year, so there's been some that I've made myself do a different strategy, but there's some where I'm just like, all right, I'm just gonna go with the guys that I like here. And my kind of default has been grabbing an elite wide receiver early, one to two of them, depends on how early I am in the draft. So like if I'm at the tail end, I'll probably hit two wide receivers there. And then man, once I'm in that third round, I'm smashing running backs. Rounds like 3 through 9, I think there's a ton of great value in running backs there. Lots of guys fall into that range that I feel very comfortable with, and I feel like are almost just as good as the guys that you'll take in like round 2, especially like Blake Corum, Braylon Allen. I love those guys, but I think you're spending up a little bit too much when you can get a guy like, CJ Donaldson and like the 5th, 6th round. You can get Jace McClellan in that 3rd, 4th round range. You can get some pretty good guys there without having to spend up nearly as much. And that kind of frees up that 2nd round pick a little bit to do what Justice said, which is go grab a guy like Bowers, go grab a guy like a Rondé Gadsden if they are there and there's not wide receivers that you don't like. Man, I've been finding a lot of value at QB in round 7 to 10. I've been posting about that on Twitter recently about just like the last 2 best balls. I just hit 4 QBs in a row right in that range, and it has been awesome. But here's the part that gets interesting to me. Once you get late, there's a reason why I smash running backs in that kind of like 3 through 9
There's a
range.
cliff, right?
There's a massive cliff at one point.
There's a
And
cliff.
I move away from running backs and wide receivers, even though I hit elite wide receivers early, I feel much more comfortable taking shots on wide receivers later on than I do with the running back. So again, I grab 1 to 2 guys. I'm surefire no at wide receiver, smash running backs, and then pivot back to wide receivers later on. Does that make sense? I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I would say like I agree with you 100%. Like speaking in generalities, right?
Yeah.
Like in leagues like the one we're drafting, and I had to force myself to take quarterbacks way earlier than I ever would, just because the league values quarterbacks. So you have leagues that value quarterbacks, then you have leagues that are so big that inherently quarterbacks have more value,
Of
right?
course. Because there
And
is a cliff
so,
with those eventually.
yeah, and so that you just got to be able to adjust and know your league mates, how they tend to draft, and what your settings are.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Falco, for that question. Let's move on to our next one here. This one comes from our good old buddy, Mr. Nate Marquise. He asked a question that actually got a couple people buzzing in the comments underneath. So good job on you, Nate, for coming up with that sweet, sweet engagement content on Twitter. But he asked in our comment section, who is this year's Bo Nix, the Chris K special, as we might say? The veteran that's been underwhelming most of his career, but then blows up this year in 2023. And then he asked the second question. This is where I let him cheat a little bit, but it was a good double question here. On the flip side, who's that proven CFF veteran that flops like Lou Nichols and Tavion Thomas did last year? So I guess I will start with this one, and we'll take one question at a time. So who is my Bo Nix this year? Well, I wanted to not pick a guy that was talked about in the comments. And so that meant Spencer Rattler, Tyler Van Dyke, and Emory Jones were pretty much off my discussion possibilities here. And I think all 3 of those guys are actually really good answers. I think any 3 of those guys, for the most part, could end up having really, really good years. Maybe not Tyler Van Dyke, because we haven't really seen the rushing upside of him. But like Emory Jones, I fully expect a bounce back year for him now that he's pretty much locked down that Cincinnati job. You got Scott Satterfield, who's done wonderful things with Millie Cunningham over there. That could be really, really fun for us this year. But speaking of Louisville guys, I think the one I have kind of settled in on here, I don't know if he's going to be quite he's not going to be quite the Bo Nix level, like potential QB1 guy, but I think he'll end up having a really good year. And that is, I'm going to go with Jack Plummer. Again, very mediocre for most of his career, but again, you got him coming back to Louisville with Jeff Brom. Brom basically handpicked him out of the portal and said, hey, come on back to me. Aiden O'Connell, the bad man's gone. You can finally start, and we don't have to worry about anything. And you're pretty much almost locking him in for 500 passing attempts, and this is going to be in the ACC. This is no longer Brom's offense in the the Big Ten, where you have defenses constantly slowing things down, running games constantly slowing things down. I can see a lot of shootout potential there, and for Brom to have a much more successful quarterback than he's had in the last couple of years. And then you look at Louisville's schedule, they dodge Clemson. They dodge Florida State, 2 of the toughest defenses in that conference. So, and they're out of conference. They get Notre Dame, which is not great, and they still get NC State right before that. Not a great 2 weeks there. But their out of conference is Murray State and Indiana. I think that Plummer's in for a really, really good year this year. Again, I don't know about top QB1 levels unless they just get really, really efficient. But I think that's going to be my pick for now. There's another guy I want to talk about that I really think has QB1 potential, but that'll come in on a later question. So, Justice, who is your Bo Nix, Chris K special?
So I wrote down 3 names, and I had not seen Nate's Twitter post, so I didn't see like any of the responses. The first name I won't talk about him. It was one of the responses was Spencer Rattler. The next name I wrote down was DJU.
I thought about DJ.
Because he offers the rushing upside, right?
Yep.
Especially like the goal line potential, like touchdowns. But But it's interesting you call this a Chris K special because the answer, that I wrote down,
You did
is
not write
definitely a
down.
Chris K special. Is JJ McCarthy?
Stop, Justice. We don't need to feed this man anymore.
No, but yeah, that is, and this is a question that I've actually thought about before, right? And we've talked about in
Oh
our
yeah.
Slack probably, I don't know, months ago. But JJ McCarthy has the tool set to be able to do it.
He does.
The biggest question is will they allow him to do it, right?
Yeah.
That's number one, will they allow him to do it? And number two, probably the biggest concern for me is they don't necessarily play a lot of games where they are forced to allow him to do it, right?
Yes.
They can just run the ball a million times and win the game, and I think that's Harbaugh's MO, because I feel like he's risk adverse,
Yep.
and so I don't know that if I had to bet money on one of the three guys I wrote down, I think I'd bet money on McCarthy. I just think his skill set and matches closer to Bo Nix, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a good team. He has a good offense around him, other pieces. So
All righty. Again, Chris K is gonna be happy to hear you on that bandwagon.
yeah,
there,
and I
Justice.
didn't know you were going to call it the Chris K special, right? But that's pretty.
Well, because
that's
he called Bo Nix last year, and then he called Kenny Pickett the year before. So again, I'll give him credit where it's due. He's been good at this the last couple of years. So he's on JJ McCarthy this year now, but I've done a pretty good job too because I grabbed in that dynasty league that we were talking about. I grabbed Kenny Pickett in the 40th round on the startup year and everything, and he ended up just shooting off. And then last year I grabbed Michael Penix Jr. in the 23rd round of the supplemental. And so that,
and my redraft leagues, I'm fairly confident Bo Nix was a undrafted.
he
was a
was.
free agent.
He absolutely was, and everybody saw him against Georgia. They're like, "Oh, glad I dodged that bullet," and then he just blew up the rest of the year.
Yep.
All right, so the other side of this question here, Justice. On the flip side, who's that proven CFF veteran that flops like Lou Nichols and Tavion Thomas did last year? I'll go with mine first because I think this is somewhat of a doozy for people who are drafting him right now. I was big on LaDamian Webb coming back before spring and everything like that. I'm kind of getting scared of him right now because this staff cannot shut up about how much they love how deep this running back room is for them. It really does sound like that last year, LaDamian Webb's volume was almost out of necessity because they didn't feel like they had anybody behind him that could step up. And then he gets injured towards the end of the year, and it kind of proves to the staff that hey, we can't run a guy 200 times like we have been and expect him to stay healthy the whole time. So it sounds like they're going to move a little bit more towards a committee approach. And I don't think Webb's going to fall off a cliff. I think he'll still be good for you several weeks out of the year. But I don't think we can really at this point expect what we got last year where he had 150 more carries than the next guy. I think guys like Brandon Crum, Jake Hopper, who the staff has said have taken massive steps this spring, are probably going to eat into his volume just a little bit more. And then they have three good wide receivers. Again, you got Lacey, you got Voisin, you got Ivory there now. They might take away some of the touchdown production there as well because Webb had 13 touchdowns last year. You would expect that to probably regress a little bit given the volume given the production that he had on the ground. So that's where I'm going with. I think he's probably the one I'm the most scared of in that first 2 to 3 round range.
I agree with you. I feel like he's I hate to use the word artificially, but he's artificially propped up because of the lack of what I would say high-end elite running back talent this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think where you're drafting him, and what your expectations are, I feel like I agree with you. They're not going to be met or not likely to be met, I think.
Yeah, 100%. So, Justice, who's your bust? Who's your guy that you're thinking flops?
So the guy that, we talked before, you had mentioned you were going to talk about Webb. So my guy might not necessarily be what I would consider a veteran, but he is a somewhat proven commodity. So I kind of would throw him in that group, and that's Richard Reese at Baylor. Um, he's not. I don't know his ADP, but I feel like he's probably going like right around RB20. Um, if you could look that up, Jared.
I
But
am RB43.
so well, my concern about Reese is like he's so small, and he got close to 1,000 yards last year. But similar to like what you said with LaDainian Webb, I feel like that was for the most part out of necessity. They had a lot of injuries. Obviously, there were some issues with like Tay McWilliams. I think he had an injury, and then he clearly got in the doghouse and like left to school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's only 175 pounds. Quaylen Jones is still there. They brought in Dominic Richardson from Oklahoma State.
Yep.
Jordan Jenkins, who was a also a freshman, that at least from a rating standpoint was fairly high up there. And I'm not saying like any of those guys are necessarily better than Richard Reese. I just feel like it's going to be much more of a committee approach than it was last year. And Reese's size just really scares me for him to, get 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns.
And to your point on that, we saw them last year pull the plug on Richard Reese. Like he would have like a 30 carry game, and then he'd go to having like 4 to 8 carries the very next week because they realize the amount of volume that they're giving him, and they say like, all right, we got to give this guy a break. So we can't expect that on a week to week basis even this year. Now, hopefully we find like a little sweet spot in there where they think, okay, we can give him 20 carries a game, and then you still got a really good CFF running back for yourself.
Or at least 20 touches somehow, right? He could be more
20
efficient.
touches, yeah. Yeah, 100%. But like to your point as well, like he's going in the 10th round right now, RB43. I'm personally comfortable with having him as like my 4th RB off the board, and sometimes I can find him even a little bit later than that sometimes. But is that an okay range for you, Justice? Or
I'm probably out on him. I don't know. He's not like he doesn't fit the type of guy that I'm trying to draft.
no, I get it.
Yeah. And I know some people like him even more, right? It seems like there's two groups of people, and maybe that's why the ADP is a little lower than I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
People either like really, really in on him, or people not so in on him. And so, maybe that's why that ADP is where it is.
Yeah.
I expected it to be closer to like, I don't know, round 7 or 8.
I was curious. I was trying to look up his efficiency. He wasn't as efficient as I thought he was last year, but
Has his ADP moved much over the months, or?
Let me check. Actually, I can actually look that up with our dandy little thing here. Let me see if I can find. I don't think so. He went down this from April to May. He went down about 15 spots. So about
Okay.
He went from the like middle of the 8th round to like directly at the end of the 10th round, basically.
Yeah, I do feel like sometimes people forget about him, right? And so,
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm getting him, for me to consider him, I'm probably looking like round 13 or something.
Okay.
But he's usually not going that late. So,
Alrighty. Let's move on to our next category of questions. We got like 4 questions in a row here where people just specifically ask about a certain player. So we will go ahead and start knocking through those. Justice, you'll get the first one here. This one comes for us from our good friend, Mr. Mike Valerie at FF_Dirty Mike on Twitter. And he said, expectations for Trenton Bourguet this season. For those of you who don't know who that is the last year's starter for the Arizona State Sun Devils. Still in a quarterback competition for this year. But Justice, what are you thinking for him this year?
So I had to look him up to see which brother it was, right? Because there's 2 brothers.
I would say Trayson's over at Western Michigan.
Yeah, I had to look up to see which one was which. So, I mean, I know of him. I can't keep him straight which is which. I don't really think much of him. I think, my personal opinion is it's going to be Drew Pine as the starter, and then maybe Rashada at some point. That's just kind of what I feel like. I think they brought Drew Pine in there for a reason, right? I feel like he's like the bridge guy. Like he's Not saying Drew Pine's great or anything, but I feel like he's adequate enough to start for them, this year, while they, groom Rashada.
See,
So I have zero expectations for him.
I'll play devil's advocate then, because I actually expect him to win this job. I think Pine has disappointed so far in spring camp for what it sounds like. It sounds like Bourget was performing better than they were kind of expecting. Rashada obviously still new. We're kind of both in agreement there that they want Rashada to kind of take over at some point. They just don't know how soon that is going to be. Yeah. I think Bourget is your guy to start week 1. Again, Pine has starting experience as well, but Pine, I don't think people realize how messed up that Notre Dame offense got last year because they couldn't trust Pine to do a damn thing. They rushed an absurd amount of times, had to move to a committee approach on their running backs because they're giving their running backs so many carries in that offense last year because they couldn't trust Pine to throw the ball more than 10 yards down the field. So I don't think Pine's going to be the starting quarterback. I think it's going to be Bourget. And it puts him in a pretty good position to potentially be a CFF sleeper here. Again, you got Kenny Dillingham. We saw what he did with Bo Nix last year, so that's great to see. Obviously, Bourget doesn't have the experience in the offense like Bo Nix is, so I'm not calling for him to be like a top 12 quarterback or anything like that. But even still, you got a guy with good weapons. They're still in the Pac-12. Arizona State's defense is still pretty rough. Again, it's kind of in the middle of the pack for the Pac-12 and everything like that. If he can just kind of clean up on some of his mistakes, again, he had 6 interceptions last year, so you don't want to see that. I really think that there is a path to him possibly having like a Jaden DeLora kind of season, like last year's Jaden DeLora. Like Jaden DeLora threw a ton of touchdowns, but didn't have a ton of mobility. That's kind of my big question with Bourget is how mobile can they really expect him to be? But DeLora didn't have.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
I don't expect I don't know how mobile Bourget really is, but even if he got like Jane DeLora numbers, and DeLora rushed for less than 200 yards last year, if they can just get him a couple goal line carries, I think that is like the absolute ceiling. Now, realistically, I expect him to come in a little bit lower than that, but I would not be surprised if he's a top 40 QB for CFF if he does keep that job the whole year. Obviously, that's the major question there.
Yeah, it feels like maybe it could even be a platoon, right? Yeah, he does bad one week, Pine goes in there. Pine does bad, he comes out,
That would be the nightmare scenario. That would be the absolute nightmare scenario.
I'm probably avoiding the situation altogether in any kind of draft.
But the good news is that Bourget's basically going free in most drafts and everything.
Yeah, absolutely,
so,
absolutely.
If you're going to take a shot on him, you're not giving much up here. Yep.
That's true.
Alrighty. Thank you for the question, Mike. Let's go ahead and move on to our next one. This is just another question about one specific player, but it is kind of an interesting one. This one's from Todd Vincent on Twitter. He asked, how do we see Jordan Hudson fitting in at SMU? What kind of production are you expecting, and are you targeting him in drafts? Man, I'm torn here. I'm not going to lie, y'all. This is like the age-old question of which do you go with? The guy that is experienced, the guy that's been there, or do you go with the talent? Because not a doubt in my mind, Hudson's the most talented receiver on this team. But two things can be true at once. He could be the most talented one, but I still think Curley's probably going to be your wide receiver 1 because of his experience here. Now, I currently have Hudson as my wide receiver 77 with plenty of room to move him up if I start hearing some great things in spring camp. But like I mentioned earlier with the question about draft strategy, I'm very comfortable with taking shots on wide receivers in the later rounds, and Hudson's 100% a guy that I'm willing to throw a dart at. Yeah, I have him at wide receiver 77, so it's going to be real late in the draft. But there's kind of a whole tier there of guys like after like wide receiver 48 where my rankings kind of become mush a little bit, where like I'll look at the next 20 guys and just start picking out guys of like, I haven't really taken a shot on him yet. Let me just go ahead and pick him out. So I'm very comfortable with taking him in a draft. I don't know if I'm like targeting, like I have to get him by the end of the draft, but if he's there and I don't really see any other receivers that I love, yeah, absolutely, I'll take a shot on him. Here's my thing. I do think that Hudson will kind of eat into Curley a little bit. I don't think Curley's going to get the Rashee Rice treatment last year where he had like 90 receptions and the second guy had only like 30-something receptions. So that kind of puts my expectation of Hudson a little bit higher than what we saw Curley get last year as the wide receiver 2. So let's put Hudson at 50 catches, a little under 800 yards. And I think about 6 touchdowns is fair. Does that sound fair, Justice?
Yeah, yeah.
Like just as the
I
wide
mean,
receiver 2?
yeah, and like I agree with everything you said. That's my thinking is kind of the same lines. That Hudson is no doubt in my mind he's the most talented guy, from a talent standpoint, but I do feel like Curly's the number one. Hudson is going to be the number 2 guy. I have Hudson ranked 57th,
Okay.
so a little higher than
A
you.
little
But
higher, but
to
like
me,
I
but
can
when you
move
get
up.
out that far out, like it's kind of like it's going to be personal preference, right? Um, and yeah, I agree with you 100% that like Curly's not going to be Rice. So maybe you put Curly like at I don't know 75 receptions and Hudson gets like 55, something like that. That
I can
sounds,
see Curly getting to 80, but like there's gonna be I think there'll be a clear difference because that's just how last league rolls. Is that you have one guy who gets like
yeah,
25,
yeah,
30 more catches than the next guy, but even
yep,
still, I think it'd be a little bit closer this year, especially if Hudson does step up.
yep, I agree.
Yeah, and I think the absolute floor for Hudson is basically what we got with Curly last year, with like 37 receptions, 588 yards, 6 touchdowns. Like that's the floor, in my opinion. And
Yep,
that's still, again, it's not great for CFF, but like best ball, like he could probably have a good week or 2 in there and everything. You're looking good, and the ceiling is he overtakes Curly and he becomes the wide receiver
right,
1 for
and he
last year.
becomes Rasheed Rice.
So that yeah, I was saying that just makes the late flyer on him all the worth it. So.
Yep.
Alrighty, let's move on to our next question here. This one comes to us from our good buddy Chris K with the Chris K special, but he does not want to talk about a Chris K special. He wants to ask us about Dante Moore. He says, where are you drafting Dante Moore right now in each of your various formats you play? So C2C, CFF, Redraft, Best Ball, CFF Dynasty, etc. So a little bit of context on why he's even asking about this. This is K being the goose of causing problems on purpose here. I put out a tweet where I was thinking about the UCLA quarterback position, and I was kind of comparing it a little bit to 2020 Alabama, where it felt like the entire industry was convinced that 5-star true freshman Bryce Young was going to overtake Mac Jones either before the season started or sometime during the season. And I just kind of kept sitting there thinking, I'm like, well, I keep hearing that like Ethan Garbers and Dante Moore are kind of battling it out for that number 1 spot, just like Mac Jones and Bryce Young were. Are too many people dismissing the idea that Ethan Garbers could just be the number 1 quarterback throughout the entirety of the year? Because it felt very similar to the Mac Jones, Bryce Young situation where Ethan Garbers, nobody's drafting him. If people are taking a shot on that QB room, they're going with Dante Moore, and Ethan Garbers is going off and like, I did a 70-round C2C draft the other day, or not the other day, like last month. Went super, super deep. Ethan Garbers was a free agent by the end of it. Dante Moore obviously goes off very early and everything, but nobody thought to like, hey, like maybe this guy could hold on to this job for a year. I don't know. That's the context behind this. Again, it's not a prediction. I don't think Garbers will hold on to the job, but I think too many people are kind of dismissing the possibility of that because shiny new 5-star freshman. So, Justice.
It's been an inside joke, like I would say inside joke in the C2C Slack for like months, right? But first, it's Colin Schlee and Moore, and now it's Garbers and Moore. So yeah.
At least Garbers and Moore was like Schlee. That was a dumb call on us. We should have known that G5 to P5 would have been a problem there. But still, the reports are that Garbers and Dante Moore are the number 1 and the number 2, and they're battling it out for the number 1. So I'll believe the reports for right now. But Justice, it's your turn to answer this question. Where are you drafting him in all of your formats, man?
All right. So for Campus to Canton, he's top 2. And the only person that I feel like is in the conversation with him is Malachi Nelson.
Is this supplemental?
And so
or startup?
C2C supplemental.
Okay.
It's supplemental, yeah. I haven't done a C2C startup. I'm in several C2C leagues and I've only ever done one C2C startup in my entire life.
You just take over orphans?
I end up taking over orphans. So I have zero clue where he's going in startups, but in supplementals, he is a top 2 pick.
Oh,
And
100%.
it's him or Malachi Nelson. In CFF Dynasty, I feel like I don't want to say he's probably a top 5 pick. And it really depends on the owners, like the order of Nelson, Nico, and Moore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some people, I mean, my personal preference, I'm probably gonna put Moore third of those, just because I feel like the other two have a more. I don't feel like any of them have a super high rushing upside, but I feel like the other two have a higher passing volume potential than
Mm-hmm.
Moore does. So I'm gonna probably rank them higher for CFF Dynasty than Moore. Redraft and best ball I kind of throw in the same category, and it's gonna be like really late, where I'm taking a shot on him because, like you said, I don't expect him. I expect he starts at some point. I don't necessarily expect that he's gonna start week 1, right?
Yeah.
And so um, and to be all honest with you, I'm probably more apt to take him in a best ball, where if like he ain't starting, I can drop. He- Redraft, I guess. I don't know that I would use the roster spot on him. Is where I was headed. Um, Even though you can drop him and you can't drop him in best ball, but in best ball, I think I'd be more apt to give up one of my, I don't know, 5 or 6 QB spots to more. But
Yeah.
either case is gonna be late.
Yeah, I'm pretty much right in line with you for the most part. C2C startup, by the way, his ADP in May was 22, so near the end of the second round. And I think that's completely fair. Second round, I'll take that in a C2C
Yeah,
startup.
yeah, that's probably a bargain, right? Because I'm trying. Who's going ahead of them other than some of the freshmen? It's probably just Drake May, Caleb Williams, Drew Alar, Quinn Ewers. Who else? That's probably it, right?
In terms
Anybody
of
else?
quarterbacks, probably no. Kyle McCord probably not going before him. Devin
No,
Brown,
yeah.
maybe somebody might take him before Dante. I don't know, but I'd have to look it up. But even still, like a supplemental pick, I agree with you. Campus Canton top 2 pick for me is pretty easy. Like I again, just because I don't think Dante Moore will immediately take over the starting job and light the world on fire week 1 for UCLA does not mean I don't think he's a good quarterback. I fully expect him to be an NFL quarterback one day. It's just I've seen this book written before. I've watched this movie before. Guys don't have to start as freshmen to become NFL quarterbacks down the line. And they can be behind some really bad quarterbacks and still become NFL draft picks one day. I mean, just ask Justin Fields. Just ask ask a bunch of guys. I don't know why I brain farted there for a second. But again, you guys get my point. C2C, Dante Moore, easy top 2 pick in supplemental drafts. CFF Dynasty, I agree with you, Justice. He's top 4 pick for me. It's between him, Nelson, Nico, and I throw Baxter in the top 4, and I think that's a pretty clear tier right there of all of those guys. Best ball, I'm with you on both best ball and redraft. Very late if I do so. And in best ball, I'm only doing it if I can double tap him with Garbers. And then in redraft, I'm with you. With a limited roster space, I'm probably just letting him go undrafted. And I'm not taking the roster space on that because a lot of the redraft leagues I do only go like 16 to 20 spots deep. And I don't want to hold on to a guy that may start. And even if he does start, I don't think he'll have his full CFF potential unlocked in year 1 as a true freshman. So probably not worried about him that much in redraft.
If there's one thing I would add to like a dynasty league, and it was something I thought about before our current draft is, I can see an argument for taking him over Nico and Malachi Nelson from the simple fact that with those two guys, you're probably getting 2 years, right? And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
With Dante Moore, it's a good chance you get 2.5 years at least, right? Maybe 3.
Maybe
And
3.
so maybe you're getting an extra year out of him. So I can see a path to putting him over those other 2 guys, even though, that other 2 guys at a system basis are in better systems.
Alrighty. Let's move on to the next question here. This one comes from our good buddy Sal. Thank you, Chris K, for that question as well. Sal asks, how high are you all on Casey Thompson at Florida Atlantic? And I get to answer this question first. And the answer it is, Sal, I quite frankly have been high on him enough. I knew I liked this landing spot for Casey Thompson. And he's been one of those guys that's been pretty disappointing for the most part throughout his career. Some of us thought he might do really well with Mark Whipple at Nebraska last year. Didn't quite work out over there. There's a lot of things going on with Nebraska last year, so I don't fully put that on Casey Thompson. But now he's reunited with Tom Herman, the guy he initially committed to at FAU. And let's take a look at what Tom Herman was able to do with Sam Ehlinger during his time at Texas. Again, Sam Ehlinger threw for 3,000 yards 3 years in a row. Increases rushing totals 3 years in a row from 385 to 482 to 663. Tons of rushing touchdowns there. Now, you can say to me, Jared, he is not Sam Ehlinger, to which I will probably reply to you, yeah, he is not. But at the same time, he does show some rushing ability. Again, last year at Nebraska was a little rough, but they still got him 5 touchdowns. So they clearly were letting him run the ball a little bit over there. And he's playing in FAU, and we'll talk about the AAC here in a little bit, but the defenses he will be facing are worse than he would be facing in the Big 12 or the Big 10. So I think he's going to perform a lot better. You got a big fish in a small pond going on over there. He has no draft stock to worry about. All he has to do is just go out there and ball out. There's no protecting him. Obviously you don't want to protect your health regardless, but like he's not there really to build up draft stock. He is there to just go out and play some ball, put up some numbers. Let's go back to Ehlinger. In 2018, if you take Ehlinger's regular season stats, he would have finished as a QB7. In 2019, you would have taken his regular season stats, also would have finished as a QB7 last year. There's potential here for Casey Thompson to just absolutely let loose at FAU. And if Tom Herman basically runs him like he did with Sam Ehlinger, there's top 10 QB potential here. I currently have him ranked at QB, I believe I put him at 40-something, 45. Put him at QB 45, and quite frankly, if I talk myself more into this, I might be moving him up even more. He's got some good weapons there. Again, I love LeJontay Wester this year. I think that there's a ton of fun things that could go on here. So, Justice, bring me back down to earth here, man.
Yeah, so
what are your thoughts on Casey Thompson?
No, I agree with you. I think where you're getting him, I don't know what his ADP is, but my guess is like it's really late.
We're getting him free.
Yeah. So absolutely. I'm going to take him there in the redraft league. I was just trying to look up how many years of eligibility he has left, and it looks like he's only got one.
He's only got the one, unfortunately.
Even though he played only 4 games in 2019, looks like he was on the roster in 18. So that would have been his one kind of free redshirt year, other than the COVID year, so to speak. No, absolutely. In a redraft league, right? He's someone that you can wait on, and like you're getting him at like QB4, right? QB5, and he can be your QB1. So, I agree. Like he's someone that is being underdrafted probably in redraft leagues.
Yeah, it was like I said at the very top of this, I knew I liked the landing spot, but once I started putting numbers to this and everything, I'm like, holy mackerel. Like, again, do I think he's going to be Sam Ehlinger? Not quite, probably. Again, I think Sam Ehlinger had much better rushing than he does, so even though there's a drop in competition, he probably doesn't reach Sam Ehlinger rushing numbers through touchdowns or the yardage. But at the same time, man, there's that potential just sitting there. And even if he doesn't reach those numbers, you're still looking at a guy that could finish in your top 36 QBs. You're looking at a guy that'll be a starter for you several weeks out of the season. So I
have Casey ranked 50th.
50th? Okay, I got him at 45. I'm honestly willing to move him up if I think about it a little longer. So don't let me think about it too long, Justice. Otherwise, I'm going to go crazy over here. Let's go ahead and move on to our next question here. This one comes to us from our buddy Heath Boyd. And he says, Do you think Army running out of the shotgun is a foreshadowing of our country's increasing aggressiveness abroad? Or is it all just a political stunt to trick us into watching the same team do the same things with different promises? Basically, what all that gobbledygook meant is Army has a new offensive coordinator. They say they're going to move away from the triple option system to a more, I would say, hybrid between like
a Jamie Chadwell, right?
yeah, like a hybrid shotgun offense. So, Justice, I will ask you first. What do you think? Do you think that Army is actually going to change the way they do things, or is it going to be pretty much more of the same?
Well, I think Army may want to change the way they do things, but whether they have the talent or players to actually do that's probably another story, right? So
Fair point.
I haven't really followed this that closely, but what I'm envisioning is maybe they're moving more towards, like I said, a Jamie Chadwell type, spread RPO triple option. Yeah, I don't know that I would have any expectations beyond what I would normally have for Army. And that's it's from a CFF fantasy standpoint, that's the quarterback possibly, and maybe a running back if one kind of separates himself. But certainly they're not I would not expect them to be as efficient as Jimmy Chadwell's offense, especially not like if that's truly what they're going to do. I wouldn't expect that year one to be that efficient.
So I don't think that's quite what they're going to do. So let me tell you about Drew Thatcher, their new offensive coordinator here. He was the offensive coordinator at the University of Nebraska, Kearney in 2022. Army had 104 total passing attempts last year. UNK had 179. So there is still mostly
not a big difference.
I would say it's still a mostly triple option offense here, but you do see that increase in passing attempts right there. You see the number of passing yards per game go up to about 137 passing yards per game compared to what Army has right now, which is abysmal. And there is a little bit of intrigue here. They really do let their QB kind of throw it a little bit more than we definitely have seen Army do the last couple of years. The quarterback at UNK, TJ Davis, threw 167 times for 1,370 yards and 16 touchdowns. That's pretty much unheard of for a Army quarterback. And he got that production on the ground. He led the team in rushes, 191 rushing attempts for 1,136 yards and 13 touchdowns to go along with that. I don't know who Army's starting quarterback is going to be this upcoming year. I know Mox is big on Coleman over there. But if you give me a guy with 1,136 rushing touchdowns or rushing yards, and 13 touchdowns, and you can get me 16 passes through the air, I'm kind of a little bit interested in that. But in terms of the running backs, I think it's going to be mostly more of the same here in terms of they're going to split up the running backs. You're not going to see one guy get the major carries. It's just got a little bit more potential in the passing game than we've seen in the past.
I mean, it seems like every now and then you do see one guy, but like trying to predict that, just can't, I don't think, right?
Air Force is probably the easiest one because they typically have
it's more
one
consistent
guy.
For sure, yeah.
So, but again, that's Army. Got any more thoughts on that, Justice, or can we move on to a couple of dynasty questions here?
Yeah, I'm ready to move on.
All right, we got a couple of questions about freshmen here. First one comes to us from our buddy Brandon Sanders at CFF University on Twitter. He asks, do you like the potential of Barry Jackson at Cincinnati or Jaden Greathouse at Notre Dame more for a breakout candidate of the year for freshman wide receivers? And I think Brandon took both of these guys in our supplemental draft.
He definitely took Barry Jackson. I don't know if he took Greathouse.
I think he took I'm pretty sure he took Greathouse as well. So who's up first? I'm up first. So I'll kind of be quick about this one. I like Jackson's potential way more before they brought in Xavier Henderson to Cincinnati. I think that his breakout potential kind of got nerfed pretty badly there when not only they brought in a guy from an SEC school, but a guy that has worked with Emory Jones before, already kind of has that connection right there. If there's going to be a receiver who stands out for Cincinnati this year, it's going to be probably Xavier Henderson. And even still, more than likely, there's going to be nobody that really stands out there, and you just kind of call it a day. Versus Greathouse, I think Greathouse is in a pretty great position here. He kind of fills that big body need for Notre Dame when they don't really have another tight end that's really kind of stood out behind Michael Mayer. He plays in that slot, so he'll be kind of on the interior of the field like the tight ends would have been for the most part. And Hardman needs some receiving targets. There's not a lot of great options there at Notre Dame. But the problem is he is playing in the slot, as I mentioned, but that's kind of where Notre Dame has some of their best options at receiver. They got Jaden Thomas, and they got Chris Tyree, who's moving over from running back. So unless they're constantly running 4 wideout sets and they're constantly having 2 slots out there, probably nerfs Greathouse a little bit. But if I had to pick one guy, I'd go with Jaden Greathouse. Your thoughts, Justice?
So I don't want to belabor the point, but if you're interested in more information on these two guys, I'd go back and watch the episode that Chris K and I did.
Yes, sir.
Because we spent quite a bit of time on both of these two individuals. To answer the question, it's going to be Greathouse for me all day. I think I said in that on that show that I felt like Jackson was like getting hyped up on like too much. So while I was preparing for that show, I'm trying to find like his spring game stats. They don't exist, right? And so I'm just reading like articles, and basically the only thing that says is like he caught, a long touchdown pass from Drogosh. So what does that tell me? Number one, like he wasn't with the first team. He's with the second team, I'm assuming. And the one thing I will say that I found from a positive standpoint for Jackson is that there was consistently comments about him and that he's playing well. And so that is a positive certainly for a freshman. Whereas Greathouse kind of like you said, and like Chris K and I both talked about, it feels like he can take over that tight end kind of production, that middle of that possession type guy for Notre Dame. And he had a crazy stat line for the spring game, was like 11 catches, something like that.
I think it was 9 for 118 yards and no touchdowns.
Maybe he had double-digit targets.
Yeah.
And Sam Hartman's there, right? And so who am I going to trust more, Sam Hartman or Emory Jones when it comes to passing the ball? Like, that's a no-brainer, I think.
Exactly.
So, yeah, Greathouse for sure.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and move on to the next one here. So that was Greathouse versus Barry Jackson. What about this, Justin? Comes from our friend Shane Whitehead here. Between Nelson and Nico, which are you drafting first for CFF only?
Oh man, so that is like a tough question. I thought, that I might get a choice. I didn't think I'd get a choice. I figured the choice would be made for me. But if I had to choose between the two, I'm probably slightly leaning to Nelson.
Okay, interesting.
I feel like it's super close between the two, so you're nitpicking to make a difference. Nico's his thin build worries me a little, and will he be able to, last in the SEC? I guess so.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably my reasoning why.
So I slightly prefer Nico. Again, this is you're picking between two of your children here. Like like both of these guys are going to be studs, but the reason I'm going to lean towards Nico is one reason only. There's nobody between Nico and that starting job with Joe Milton if Joe Milton were to go. At USC, I still think Malachi Nelson will be the starter next year, but Miller Moss is still there, and he's being a pain in the rear by not leaving. So there's still that like 3, 4, 5% chance that Nelson gets delayed 2 years before he sees the field because for some reason Miller Moss wins that starting job. Again, I think it's very unlikely, But if you give me the two options and you're nitpicking here, like I'll
Yeah,
take the guy
you're
who
absolutely right. You're nitpicking.
like you're nitpicking here, but like give me the guy who it's already clearly the number 2 guy versus like with USC, they're like, oh, Miller Moss is still technically our backup right now behind Caleb, and I'm just like, how long does that last? But regardless, it's still there. So I think that's what's going to let me lean towards Nico just a little bit.
Well, I do think like Moss is probably the backup for at least the first half of the year. I don't disagree on that at all. But next year, when we expect both these guys to be starters, if Miller Moss is starting over Malachi Nelson,
We're in
then
trouble.
a lot of people were wrong, right? They're
We're in
wrong.
trouble. And like again, just a reminder, by the way, this is for CFF only. That's what Shane asked for here. If this was a C2C draft, I'd go Nelson all day long. I think there's a lot of questions regarding
absolutely.
Nico's ability to translate to the NFL. I trust Nelson a lot more on that. But in terms of just CFF, give me Nico. All right. Next question here. We got another question regarding freshman quarterbacks. I'm going to keep this one short, but this comes from our friend Kevin Coleman at theboys_22 from the Devi Royale. He asks, better investment in CFF Dynasty, Jackson Arnold or Dante Moore? Again, I'll be quick on this one. I have some questions with Moore in terms of like how high his ceiling will be because I don't know how well his rushing will be. But as Nate pointed out in our Slack, and good on him for this, DTR's rushing stats in high school were not great either, like Dante Moore, and we all know DTR is a rushing quarterback now. But even so, I'd still probably go with Moore because if he does unlock that rushing ability, his ceiling is going to be higher on a year-to-year basis at UCLA. I love Jackson Arnold. I consider him the last of like the elite quarterbacks in this year's draft for CFF Dynasty. But to me, he's decidedly the fourth guy. The other three, you can argue, I think, between like who you would take first and everything. But Arnold, while great, is still that fourth guy. So I'm going to take Moore over Arnold here. Your thoughts, Justice?
So I think Arnold, if everything was in a vacuum, I think Arnold might be the choice. From the standpoint, I feel like he has a higher scoring average than Dante Moore or higher potential.
Mm-hmm.
But given where you have to draft both of these guys, right? They're both going to be first round picks. And so I'm going to take Dante Moore because I just feel like it's way safer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Than Arnold because they got Michael Hawkins coming in next year. And I think Arnold's probably better than Hawkins, but I don't know, right? And so obviously Hawkins could change his mind. Dante Moore is like the guy for the next 3 years at UCLA. And so if I got to spend a first round pick and an investment, as Kevin put it, I'm taking Moore, right? That's a more sound investment, safer investment.
All right, fair enough. All right, next question comes to us from Benjamin Jacob. He left us like 5 questions. I had to choose one, but I do love this question, actually. This is actually, it got me thinking a little bit with some of these teams. What new Big 12 team are you the most interested in from a CFF perspective? So again, your new Big 12 teams, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. Which one are you the most interested in, Justice?
So I actually ranked them. Houston was number 1 for me. UCF was number 2, BYU 3rd, and Cincinnati 4th. I just feel like the Houston offense, from a CFF perspective, offers more options. A decent quarterback, a good running back, and maybe 2 options at receiver. And so when I'm looking at from a team perspective, I'm thinking who has the more draftable options or viable draftable options. And for me, that's Houston.
I think you're right in terms of they'll be the ones that translate the best to still producing on a week by week basis. I kind of interpreted this question a little bit differently in terms of I am having the most fun trying to figure out BYU. They're the team that I am currently the most interested in because I feel like for the most part we have Houston figured out and stuff like that. But BYU, there's so many questions left here. And the fact is, out of the 4 teams here, and shout out to CFB Winning Edge for some of these stats, BYU has the lowest defensive roster strength score of these 4 teams coming into this league. that means they're going to be behind in a ton of games. And I hesitate to say this. Maybe best is not the right word, but I do think out of these 4 teams, they have the best, maybe not best, like most experienced passer of the bunch with Keaton Slovis. Because you go to Cincinnati, you got Emory Jones, UCF, John Rice Plumlee, and then Houston, I'm still trying to figure out Donovan Jones. I don't really know how good of a passer he is. But Keaton Slovis definitely brings in the most experience. He sounds like he's fitting in real well over there. And they have great receiving weapons for him to work with Roberts, Hill, Epps. I'm definitely having the most fun out of these 4 researching BYU and trying to figure them out. And the best part about BYU, 3 of the 4 last weeks of the season, they're playing the 3 worst defenses at least according to defensive roster strength from CP Winning Edge in the Big 12. They're playing West Virginia, they're playing Oklahoma State, and they're playing Iowa State. Those are the 3 worst defenses in the Big 12 outside of
West
BYU.
Virginia might be one of the worst defenses in all the nation.
And so, like, BYU, there's a lot of interest there for me. Because, again, you pick up some of those guys and you nail the guys that are productive on a week-by-week basis, you could have some guys that are great picks for championship week right there. Again, obviously things can change, but if you're asking me, like, which one of them's piquing my interest the most, it's got to be the Cougars.
Well, there's 2 Cougars, right?
Ah, shoot.
Houston and BYU. So, but you're not wrong, right?
The Mormon Cougars.
We both said Cougars. So.
Exactly. That's my cop-out. All righty. Let's move on to our next question here. This one comes to us from our good buddy down in the comments and in the Discord, is Mr. Brett Piney. Very similar question to or not similar question. I'm letting y'all know I'm going to talk about defenses a lot in the next 2 questions. So that's why they're all similar in my head. But Brett asks, how would you rank the Power 5 conferences in being CFF defensively friendly? So which conferences will play more of those track meets games compared to some of the others? I, like Justice in the last question, I did rank all 5. To me, very clearly, the best one for CFF, at least if things hold from what they were last year, it's got to be the Pac-12. You're looking at 7 teams in that conference that were 100 plus in defensive team performance in all of FBS. They are horrendous in terms of being able to stop offenses out there at West. It's why we love those Pac-12 games after dark. They're high scoring. Your guys are getting tons and tons of work. To me, the Pac-12 is easily the best conference to invest in if you're just looking for guys to take shots on and hope that they get into some high-scoring games. Next tier, I put the Big 12 and the ACC. These are like the coin flip high-scoring games. You're going to have a ton of over-unders in these conferences that range from 55 to 60. But they're not going to end in the 55 to 60 range. They're either going to finish with 30 total points, or they're going to finish with 90 points scored. They're not going to finish in that 55 to 60 range, but you don't know which ones are going to be which, really. So I think that that's kind of the next one. SEC is then the ones below that, mostly because the offenses are getting a little bit better over there. Their defenses aren't holding up as well, but still, you got some really good defenses over in the SEC. So I would kind of put them fourth. And then easily, Big Ten is the worst. In terms of just in a generalized standpoint, you have low-scoring games, tons of offenses that are run-heavy, good defenses, slow down the clock, less plays run per game. Big Ten easily the worst out of the Power 5 conferences. Pac-12 easily the best, in my opinion. What do you think, Justice?
So, generally, I agree. I ranked them as well. I do have a different number 1 than you.
Okay.
But I kind of view this as 3 different tiers.
Okay.
And so in that top tier is the Big 12 and the Pac-12. I had the Big 12 ranked number 1, Pac-12 ranked number 2. But I think you're nitpicking between the two. The next tier I had the ACC and the SEC. And I did rank the ACC 3rd and the SEC 4th. I do think the SEC has better offenses, but they also have like better defenses.
That's what I'm
It
saying.
might not necessarily show from like a score standpoint, but the SEC has the strongest defensive talent, of any conference, bar none.
Of course.
And then a third, like like you said, clear bottom tier or fifth is the Big Ten, right?
Yeah.
They're just their offenses are just so old school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, they've gotten more old school with Brom leaving Purdue and going to Louisville. So
We
yeah,
got the dairy raid coming into Wisconsin, so that'll probably help their average a little bit.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but they like to. I mean, Longo runs the ball a lot too. But obviously, he's not going to be like Wisconsin of the past. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next question here. One, because we're running out of time, but two, it's a very similar question to the last one. This one comes to us from Chris on Twitter. Which college football conference tends to produce the most reliable fantasy football performers, and what factors really kind of contribute to that success? Justice, you'll start off with this one. What are your thoughts on this question?
So I got two answers, one a P5 and a G5 answer.
Perfect. That's what I'm
And
going with too.
and so my P5 answer was the Big 12, for all the reasons we talked about earlier. It just feels like, there. I can't think of even Kansas, right? Like who you would think like traditionally maybe not,
Yep.
but I can't think of a single team there that's like, doesn't have, one or two really, really good fantasy options. And for the G5, I picked the MAC conference, right? Because I love Maction, right? I don't think they don't play great defense, right? And like
No.
and we talk about all the time. You get into the MAC, you get into the Maction, the Tuesday night games, and like you're waiting to say like who's the guy that goes absolutely bonkers, right? Because it seems to have last year seemed to be a down year for that.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, like it seems like there's a guy going bonkers every week, right? So
In
those
every
are
game,
my
it
two.
feels like there's at least one.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you picked those two conferences, because I'm actually going to go two different conferences here. Again, as I kind of spoiled in the last question, everything, Pac-12 is my Power 5 here. Already kind of discussed why. Again, they got 700 plus defensive team performances there. They also had 4 of the top 12 QBs in CFF last year. They had 2 of the top 12 running backs. 6 teams from the Pac-12 were in the top 25 in yards per game. 5 were in the top 25 in terms of points per game. 4 in the top 25 for rush yards per game, and 4 in the top 25 for pass yards per game. Those are all above average in terms of how many you would expect out of each conference. So again, that's my reason for the Pac-12. Again, they're going to put up points again this year, because I don't think any of those teams really got that much better on defense. And then my G5 conference, you went the MAC, I'm going the AAC. Again, another conference where you had 7 teams, 100 plus in defensive team performance last year, and they're getting decidedly, and I mean decidedly, weaker in terms of who they're losing and who they're bringing in terms of defense. They lose Cincinnati, they lose UCF, they lose Houston, 3 teams who all had pretty decent defensive production, and who are they bringing in? Charlotte, who's 129th in defense last year. Florida Atlantic, 110th last year. North Texas, 119th. Rice, 116th. And even UTSA and UAB, they're hovering in that kind of 50 to 70 range. And you're bringing in some pretty good offenses as well. I talked about Tom Herman. I expect them to do very well at FAU. UTSA, we all love Frank Harris. We all love Joshua Cephas. We all love all of those guys over there with the Roadrunners. UAB, their rushing attacks coming in here. North Texas should be looking pretty good this year, with Eric Morris kind of coming in there as well. I think the AAC is decidedly going to become one of the conferences where we are looking at them and saying, all right, which games are going to hit 90 plus this week? Because there's going to be 2 of them per week, probably, at least.
I'm not nearly as excited about the AAC as you are, from the simple fact that, like, to me, I view it as like Conference USA 2.0. And so
Conference USA put up plenty of points for CFF. I'm just pointing that out.
They did. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, you make valid points for sure.
Alrighty, and then let's hit up our last question here. This was a fun one because, again, this is kind of like the one where somebody's like, all right, dig deep, go for a sleeper here. And this one comes to us from Dan. He specifically asked, who is a Sunbelt player that we are not talking about in June that we will be talking about in October? I kind of use this question as an opportunity to answer a question that I've been kind of wanting to research for a while. And that to me is the fact that we're not talking about the James Madison wide receiver room enough. I mean, you got Chris Thornton gone now. He did pretty well last year, except for the fact that he had 5 touchdowns in the first 2 weeks and then scored 2 the rest of the year. That sucked. But so somebody's got to replace him. And so I kind of took the opportunity here and thought to myself, like, well, no James Madison wide receivers are really being heavily targeted in drafts. So I feel like anybody I say here will be applicable. So I took a look. I kind of took a dive into their wide receiver room here. Again, Thornton, slot guy, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. What are we looking at in terms of replacement? My immediate thought was Reggie Brown. He's the veteran, but he's kind of sitting there on the outside. The system doesn't typically target the outside pretty heavily. So I take a shot on Reggie Brown, but I don't know if he's going to be the guy I'm going to list here. The guy I am going to go with here is a man by the name of Amarian Dollison, a transfer wide receiver from South Florida. He has not had a super productive year. He's never reached 300 yards in a single season with the South Florida Bulls, so that's definitely concerning. But he does play in that slot. Last year that he was at USF, he played 67% in the slot, with Thornton put himself right around 71%, so he pretty much plays right about the same number of snaps in the slot. Good Lord, almost tripped over my own tongue there. But here's the other fun part. Dollison was at South Florida with Jordan McLeod. Jordan McLeod, currently, I would say, is probably your favorite to be the James Madison quarterback. I don't think anybody's really a standout there, but if I had to pick one, I'd go with Jordan McLeod. You get some familiarity with those two, and he's in the position that typically feasts in this kind of offense. And this offense has been known to take very bad quarterbacks like Todd Centeio and turn them into CFF assets. I'm going to say Amarian Dollison is kind of my Sunbelt sleeper here. That's who I'm going to roll with for this question. So, Justice, your thoughts on him, and who's your guy?
So this is a great question for me because I feel like I think I wrote over half the Sunbelt team previews for the CFF guide. So
Ooh,
I feel like
give us a little preview.
I'm fairly versed in the Sunbelt, and I actually wrote the one for James Madison. But you made a connection that I did not make in terms of McLeod and Dollison being from South Florida, because they both were at some point in their careers. Yeah, I mean, I can see it with Dollison. I think my biggest concern for writing JMU up in the team preview is their quarterback situation.
Oh yeah.
I just don't know that anyone's going to be as productive as Todd Centeio, regardless of who they pick. So that kind of concerns me a little bit.
Yeah, but Todd Centeio is not a good quarterback either.
He's not. But I mean, I feel like he, at least in my opinion, showed more than McLeod has shown at this point in his career. Another guy who I thought maybe you were going to mention with JMU is Elijah Surratt.
Yeah, Surratt.
Yeah, who's was he? I don't know if he's an FCS All-American, but he was super productive at the FCS level.
Yeah, St. Francis wide receiver.
And so he's another one too to keep an eye on. So I wrote down 3 names. The first one, I'm just gonna go really quick here, is Tyrone Howe. And you might be saying, oh well, he kind of broke out last year, and I agree with that. But the thing to think about it, can he be more consistent, right? If you look at his stats, he had 3 monster games, right? And that's pretty much where all his stats came from. And so if he can be more consistent, can he jump up a whole nother level? And I think you might have wrote the ULM preview, so maybe you can speak more to them and their quarterbacking. But he's just an interesting name that I feel like he's underappreciated. These next 2 guys are folks that I feel like are going to step into roles where they can be super productive, and that's Marcus Carroll at Georgia State.
Love
So
that call.
Tucker Gregg, and Jamyes Williams are both gone. They combined for 1,152 yards rushing and 18 touchdowns, right? And Marcus Carroll is by all accounts the RB1 there. And so I think, he's going to at least get you double-digit touchdowns, and he's going to be that 1A, if you will. The last guy I want to mention is probably like really, really super duper deep, and that's Lance Legendre. The name might not sound familiar. He was a one-time quarterback. He was at Maryland. He is now at Louisiana Lafayette. And so I actually wrote their team preview yesterday. And, Michael Jefferson is gone. He had 51 catches on, I believe, 81 targets last year, 810 yards and 7 touchdowns. And someone's going to step into that role. And I feel like Legendre is the best bet to do that. He might do more because I feel like he's a playmaker, and they're going to want to get him the ball in space. And so, he's someone that you're getting, like, he's probably not even, I know he's not getting drafted, right? So, it's someone to keep an eye on, and maybe take a dart throw later to put on your waiver wire and watch as the season goes on.
Man, I forgot about Lance Legendre. In terms of the ULM quarterback situation, good Lord, Jared, speak English. It's probably more dire than the James Madison one is.
That's what I was afraid of.
It's pretty bad. They're looking to start probably Jaya Wright at quarterback, and he hasn't thrown a pass for them since 2021. So, and when he did, he threw 2 touchdowns, but he also threw 2 interceptions. So it was kind of rough.
I mean, Tyrone Howell seems like the perfect best ball pick, right? Just looking at his stat sheet from last year, he either went for 30 points or like nothing.
He went for 5 yards or 300. It felt like.
Yeah, he did. Literally did. Like, he had like a 250-yard game and like a 10-yard game.
I would say that's not an exaggeration. So, alrighty, that was fun. A good variety of different questions there. Again, pretty much covered everything there. Got a lot of stuff as we kind of close out here to just kind of let you guys know about. Again, CFF guy, that is coming at the 1st of July. We're working really hard to get that done and ready for you guys for that 4th of July weekend, right before a lot of your redraft leagues get started up. So we're very, very excited about that. Again, Justice, Nate, Brandon, Ethan, and Mox have all been working and Kay, excuse me, almost forgot to mention Kay. All of them have been working tirelessly to get all those team previews done. We're getting ready to kick up our player profiles. That's going to be a ton of fun. We got a lot of great stuff coming for you guys in that guide. Justice, anything that you're working on right now, man, you want to let people know about?
The CFF guide.
Yeah, okay. I beat you to it.
I mean, that's, I wrote 2 previews yesterday. I think I have Troy left to finish, and then we're done with the previews, and then, going from there.
Yeah, I got
I am on our Devi IDP Grind podcast. We'll be starting our conference preview series here probably next week, a week after. That's if you're in an IDP league, that's a must listen.
Perfect. Yep. And again, I have 3 teams left. One is UL Monroe. I hadn't written that one yet, so I had to do a little bit of quick research for you there, Justice. And then Mississippi State and Stanford are my last 2. So again, got a good variety of teams I've written about this year. It's been fun. Alrighty, really appreciate all of you guys listening. It has been fun to really kind of get back into the groove of Jason Natty, and looking forward to these next couple of months where, again, got those live draft streams starting up here soon, and got a lot of ton of fun topics for you guys over the next couple of weeks. So until then, appreciate you guys and have a wonderful and blessed week.